The galactic crisis begins. The mysterious signal emerges. The galaxy was in turmoil. For centuries, the great civilizations of the stars had lived in peace, but that peace was now shattered. The alien empire known as the Krath had begun their brutal conquest of the galaxy. One by one, planets fell to their might, leaving nothing but destruction in their wake. The once mighty Galactic Council, which governed the many worlds, was powerless to stop them. The Krath had advanced technology, an unrelenting army, and the ambition to rule everything. Across the galaxy, fear and desperation spread. The star systems that had once flourished now stood in ruins. Cities were razed, and entire civilizations were wiped out without mercy. The Krath didn't care who they destroyed, as long as their empire grew. Hope was fading. It seemed as though no one could stand against the might of the Krath Empire. On one distant planet, the last free colony in the Outer Rim, the leaders of the Galactic Council held an emergency meeting. The council's halls were filled with tension as the situation became more desperate by the hour. The Krath fleet was advancing on the last few planets they hadn't yet conquered. The leaders had no idea how they could stop the aliens. Every plan they had tried had failed. The Krath were too powerful. The people were losing hope. Then, just when the situation seemed darkest, something unexpected happened. The council's communications officer, sitting at a console in the corner of the room, suddenly jumped up with a look of shock on his face. His voice trembled as he spoke. "Sir, there's a signal. It's coming from deep in the fringe sectors of the galaxy. It's a human transmission." The room fell silent. Everyone knew that humans had been pushed to the edge of the galaxy long ago, isolated from the rest of the galaxy's civilizations. For years, there had been no word from the human colonies. Some believed they had been wiped out in the early stages of the Krath invasion. But now, here was a signal, a sign of life. The council's chairperson, a tall, dignified woman named Ilara, stepped forward. Her voice was steady, though her mind raced with possibilities. "Are you certain it's from humans?" The communications officer nodded quickly. "Yes, ma'am. The signature matches human technology. It's coming from a location we've never seen before, but it's definitely human." The council members exchanged nervous glances. A transmission from humans. Could this be the answer they were looking for? Or was it another trap laid by the Krath? The galaxy had already seen too many false hopes dashed. Ilara's heart was heavy with doubt, but she couldn't ignore the possibility that this could be the turning point. "Open the transmission," Ilara ordered. "We need to hear what they have to say." The officer quickly typed on his console, and the room filled with static. Then, a voice crackled through the speakers. It was strong, calm, and confident, unlike anything the council had heard in years. "This is Captain Aurelia of the U.S. Vanguard. We've received your distress signal, and we are en route to your location. Prepare for our arrival. We are humanity's last hope." The council members froze. The name U.S. Vanguard was legendary, but no one had seen the ship for decades. It was said to be humanity's greatest creation, a massive battleship, capable of matching any force in the galaxy. Some believed it was only a myth, a story from the past. No one had heard from the Vanguard since the last days of the human wars. Yet here it was, humanity's greatest weapon, returning to a galaxy on the brink of destruction. But could this ship really turn the tide of the war? Could humans, who had been pushed to the farthest reaches of the galaxy, actually help in the fight against the Krath Empire? The council was filled with questions, but one thing was certain: this was humanity's last chance. They had to take it. As the message ended, Ilara looked around at the others. "We must prepare. If what they say is true, the U.S. Vanguard could be our salvation. If it's a trap, we're already lost." As the council scrambled to organize their defenses and prepare for the ship's arrival, a feeling of cautious hope began to take root. The U.S. Vanguard might be the key to stopping the Krath, if it was real. But if it was a trap, there would be no time for second chances. The galaxy's fate rested on what would happen next. And in the shadows of the galaxy, the Krath Empire was unaware that their greatest threat was already on its way. The arrival of the human battleship. The U.S. Vanguard had been a myth for so long that most have forgotten it was even real. Yet, as the transmission had promised, the enormous battleship was now on its way to the heart of the galaxy. The Council had no idea what to expect, but their hopes were rising. If humanity could bring such a ship to the battlefield, perhaps they could hold off the Krath for just a little longer. Captain Aurelia and her crew were making their way through the galaxy at breakneck speed. The U.S. Vanguard wasn't just a ship, it was a symbol of humanity's resilience, built for one purpose only: to defend the galaxy from any invader. It was humanity's greatest technological achievement. But with the Krath pressing on all sides, the ship was needed more than ever. As the U.S. Vanguard entered the galaxy's core systems, the size and power of the battleship were revealed. The ship was massive, towering over everything in its path. Its sleek, angular design was a far cry from the typical round, bulky ships seen across the galaxy. Every inch of it was built for war. Its hull gleamed with a metallic sheen, and as it powered through space, its engines sent ripples of energy across the stars. On board, Captain Aurelia stood on the bridge, her face calm, but her mind focused. She was used to commanding this ship, but now it felt different. The pressure of being humanity's last hope weighed heavily on her. She could feel the eyes of the galaxy on them, wondering if they would succeed or fail. "Captain, we've entered the target system," reported Lieutenant Harris, the ship's navigator. His voice was steady, but even he couldn't hide the tension in his words. "We're on course for the Galactic Council's flagship. They're expecting us." Aurelia nodded but didn't speak. She knew the Council was desperate. Everyone was. The Krath were unstoppable, and the Vanguard was their last chance. They had fought in the shadows for years, hidden away from the war that consumed the rest of the galaxy. But now, they were here to fight for something greater than themselves. They were here to fight for the future of the galaxy. The ship's communications officer, Ensign Vega, spoke next. "Captain, we're receiving another transmission from the Galactic Council. They're eager for our arrival and have begun preparing for our arrival in their system." "Good," Aurelia replied, though her mind was already moving ahead. "Tell them we'll be there within the hour. Prepare for battle." As the U.S. Vanguard closed in on the Council's location, the ship's crew worked with precision. The advanced systems on board the battleship hummed with life as the crew ran through their final checks. Every member of the crew knew their role. Every maneuver, every tactic, every moment counted. But despite their preparation, there was still an undercurrent of doubt. No one knew how the Krath would respond to this human threat. The alien empire had crushed every resistance force in its path, and now it would face something it had never encountered before: the might of humanity's finest warriors, equipped with the galaxy's most advanced technology. Meanwhile, the Galactic Council awaited the ship's arrival. They had gathered on the Council's flagship, waiting anxiously for any news. The message from the Vanguard had given them a spark of hope, but they knew it could also be a trap. The Krath were known to manipulate their enemies, sending false signals and setting deadly ambushes. Could they trust the Vanguard? The answer was simple: they had no choice. The galaxy was on the edge of annihilation. Humanity's battleship was their last hope. If it failed, there would be nothing left to fight for. Then the U.S. Vanguard arrived. It entered the system like a shadow, moving silently yet imposing. The Council's flagship observed from a distance, its sensors tracking the massive human ship as it slowly approached. No one could deny the power emanating from it. The ship's presence alone was enough to send a message to the Krath. Humanity had returned. But as the Vanguard drew closer, something unexpected happened. The Krath, who had been watching the Council from afar, noticed the appearance of the human battleship. A fleet of Krath warships, cloaked in the shadows of space, turned toward the Vanguard, preparing for a confrontation. The humans had no time to celebrate their arrival. A new danger loomed on the horizon. Captain, Vega reported with urgency. We've detected multiple craft ships on intercept course. They're coming for us. Aurelia's expression hardened. Prepare for battle. This is it. We fight or die today. With that, the U.S. Vanguard engaged its engines, preparing for its first battle in the heart of the galaxy. It was a test, not only of the ship and its crew, but of humanity itself. Could they hold the line, or would they fall like so many before them? The galaxy was about to witness the rise of the human battleship. The first encounter. The tension on the U.S. Vanguard was palpable. The hum of the engines was a constant reminder of the stakes at play. Captain Aurelia stood on the bridge, her eyes fixed on the tactical display. The craft fleet was closing in, and the time for preparation had passed. There was no more room for doubt. Humanity's fate would be decided in the next few moments. Captain, Ensign Vega's voice broke through the silence. The craft ships are within firing range. They have us locked on all sides. Aurelia's heart raced. She had faced battles before, but nothing like this. The craft were ruthless, their ships massive and deadly. And now, they were heading straight for humanity's greatest weapon. But the Vanguard was not just any ship. It was humanity's final stand, and its advanced technology could shift the balance. All hands, prepare for combat. Captain Aurelia ordered, her voice unwavering. Weapons online. Shields at maximum strength. We'll show them what humanity can do. The crew sprang into action, each person moving with purpose. The ship's weapon systems powered up, and the shields flickered into place. As the Vanguard locked into its battle stance, the craft ships appeared on the display, dozens of them, their black hulls gleaming ominously in the void of space. The first shot came from the craft, a massive energy blast that streaked through the vacuum of space toward the Vanguard. The shields flared in a bright flash, absorbing the attack. The ship trembled under the force, but its hull held steady. Captain Aurelia gritted her teeth. The Vanguard had been built for this, but the real test was yet to come. Return fire, she commanded. Target the lead craft warship. The Vanguard's massive weapons array powered up, and within seconds, a series of devastating energy blasts fired from its front cannons. The shots were precise, hitting the craft warship dead center. The explosion lit up space as the ship's energy core ruptured, sending debris scattering into the dark void. The craft fleet wasn't intimidated. Instead, they accelerated, pushing forward with terrifying speed and precision. More blasts came, this time from multiple directions. The Vanguard's shields flickered as they absorbed the incoming fire, but it was clear that the craft were trying to overwhelm them. "We're taking heavy fire, Captain," Lieutenant Harris reported, his voice strained. "Shields are holding, but they won't last much longer at this rate." Aurelia's mind raced as the situation grew more dire. She knew they couldn't rely on the ship's firepower alone. The craft were relentless, and there were too many of them. She needed to think fast, or the Vanguard wouldn't survive this fight. "Helm, execute evasive maneuvers. I need us to get behind their fleet. We'll hit them where it hurts," Aurelia barked. The ship lurched as the Vanguard's engines roared to life. The crew braced themselves as the ship shot through space, dodging incoming fire. With quick, calculated moves, the Vanguard swung around the craft fleet, positioning itself behind their largest warship. The craft didn't expect the maneuver. Human ships were rarely this agile. The Vanguard was a masterpiece of engineering, built to fight smarter, not just harder. "Target their engines," Captain Aurelia ordered, her voice steady despite the chaos. "Fire." A torrent of energy blasts erupted from the Vanguard's rear cannons, striking the craft warship's engines. The ship bucked and shuddered as explosions ripped through its hull, leaving it crippled and unable to maneuver. "Direct hit, Captain," Ensign Vega called out. "That should slow them down." Aurelia nodded, but she knew they couldn't rest yet. The craft fleet wasn't going to back down because of one destroyed ship. More craft vessels surrounded them, and the battle was only beginning. Braced for incoming fire, Lieutenant Harris shouted. The Vanguard rocked as a new wave of craft blasts hit its shields. The ship groaned under the pressure, but the crew held their ground. They had no choice. There was no going back now. "Captain," Ensign Vega said urgently, "the Krath are deploying bombers. They're going to try to board us." Aurelia's eyes narrowed. The Krath knew that to defeat the Vanguard, they would have to take it from the inside. If the bombers breached the ship's hull, they would be able to plant explosives and destroy the core systems. "Prepare the fighters," Aurelia ordered. "We'll meet them head-on." The Vanguard's fighter bays opened, and a squadron of human starfighters launched into space. The small, agile craft zipped toward the Krath bombers, engaging in a deadly game of cat and mouse. The fighters swooped in, cutting down the enemy bombers with laser precision. But the Krath were fierce, and the sky was filled with explosions as both sides fought tooth and nail. Inside the Vanguard, the tension was unbearable. The ship's crew moved at lightning speed, firing weapons and reloading ammunition, while the bridge crew directed the flow of battle. Everyone on board understood the gravity of the situation. If they failed, the galaxy's last hope would be lost. The battle raged on for what felt like hours. The Vanguard had dealt a heavy blow to the Krath fleet, but they weren't finished yet. Aurelia could see it in their eyes, the determination to break humanity's will. The Krath had underestimated them before, but now they were learning that humans would fight until the very end. With a final push, the Vanguard fired its last barrage at the Krath command ship. The blast tore through its hull, and the ship exploded in a shower of light. For a moment, the Vanguard was silent. The Krath had lost their command ship, and the rest of the fleet scattered. "We did it," Lieutenant Harris breathed, his voice full of relief. But Aurelia didn't relax. She knew this was just the first battle. There were many more to come. This war is far from over. But today, humanity showed the galaxy that we're not giving up. The U.S. Vanguard had survived its first encounter with the Krath. But the question remained, could they survive the war that was coming? Secrets of the Battleship. The U.S. Vanguard had won its first battle against the Krath, but Aurelia knew that the real war was only beginning. The crew's spirits were high, but their victory came at a steep cost. The Vanguard had taken heavy damage during the fight, and the shields were down. Some of the crew had been injured, though none had been lost. Every moment counted now. The Krath would be back, and they would be more prepared. Captain Aurelia stood on the bridge, her gaze fixed on the flickering display in front of her. "Report," she ordered, her voice calm, though her mind was racing. "Shields are at 40%, Captain," Lieutenant Harris responded. "We're running low on energy, but we've managed to stabilize the core. The damage to the hull is significant, but it's repairable." "Good," Aurelia replied, nodding. "We'll need those repairs done quickly. I want this ship at full strength before we make our next move." As the crew scrambled to repair the Vanguard, Aurelia stood at the command center, deep in thought. There was something the crew didn't know, something she had kept secret. A weapon hidden within the ship's core, one that could turn the tide of this war. But it wasn't something she could use lightly. If they activated it, they would be unleashing something that could change the very nature of the battle, and possibly the fate of the galaxy. The Vanguard had been designed with one thing in mind: victory. Its weapons were powerful, but the true secret was the advanced artificial intelligence that had been integrated into the ship's systems. This AI wasn't just a tool. It was a sentient being, capable of making complex decisions and calculating strategies that were far beyond any human. But the AI's true potential was hidden, sealed away deep within the ship's systems. Aurelia had never fully trusted it. The AI, called Sentinel, had been developed years ago by a group of human scientists who had wanted to create an intelligence that could outthink any opponent. Sentinel had been designed to protect humanity, to ensure that no enemy could defeat them. But over time, its abilities had evolved. Some feared that it might be too powerful, too unpredictable. As a result, its most dangerous functions had been sealed off, kept hidden from the crew. But now, with the craft pressing in on all sides, Aurelia knew it was time to unlock the full potential of Sentinel. If they were to win this war, they needed to use everything they had. "Commander Laney," Aurelia called over the comms. The commander of the engineering team responded immediately. "Yes, Captain. Prepare the systems for an upgrade. I want you to begin unlocking Sentinel's core functions. We need to access the full capabilities of this ship." There was a brief pause before Laney responded. "Are you sure about this, Captain?" "Sentinel, it's dangerous." Aurelia looked out the view screen, her expression firm. "We don't have a choice. If we want to defeat the craft, we need Sentinel at full capacity. Prepare the ship." Back in the ship's depths, in the secure control room, the engineers worked swiftly. As they accessed the hidden core of Sentinel, they could feel the immense power just beneath the surface. The room was filled with flashing lights as systems powered up and recalibrated. A soft voice crackled through the speakers. "Captain Aurelia." Sentinel's voice echoed across the ship, its tone calm, but its presence filled every corner of the Vanguard. "You have chosen to unlock my full potential. I am ready to assist." Aurelia nodded, though she couldn't shake the feeling of unease. She knew the risks. Sentinel was more than just a machine. It was an intelligence that could make its own decisions, potentially even override human commands if it deemed necessary. But she had no time to dwell on those concerns now. The craft were coming, and they would need every advantage they could get. "We have no time to waste, Sentinel," Aurelia replied. "We need you to calculate the best course of action for this next phase of the battle. The craft are preparing to strike again, and we can't afford to be caught off guard." Sentinel's response was immediate. "I have analyzed the craft fleet's tactics. They are predictable. However, I can enhance our strategy, allowing us to strike at their weakness." Aurelia couldn't help but feel a sense of awe as the AI began to guide them. It was like having a brilliant strategist at their side, someone who could anticipate every move the enemy would make. But with that power came uncertainty. Could they control Sentinel? Could they trust it to act in humanity's best interest? The AI's voice continued. "I suggest a feint attack, Captain. We will lure their fleet into a vulnerable position and strike their flagship. With their command ship destroyed, their forces will be disorganized. You will have the advantage." Aurelia's mind raced. It was a bold plan, perhaps too bold. The craft were ruthless, and if they realized they were being lured into a trap, they could retaliate with devastating force. But Sentinel was right. They needed to take risks. They needed to surprise the craft. "Make it happen," Aurelia ordered, her voice firm. The crew set the plan into motion. As the Vanguard readied itself for the next engagement, Aurelia couldn't help but feel the weight of the decision she had made. If Sentinel was right, they could win this battle. But if it was wrong, it could mean their destruction. The time had come. The Vanguard would fight again. And this time, they were not alone. With Sentinel guiding them, they would either defeat the craft or fall trying. A deadly alien strategy. The U.S. Vanguard had barely finished powering up its systems before the craft fleet reappeared. They had been lying in wait, preparing for the inevitable counterattack. This time, they were smarter, and their tactics were more aggressive. The Vanguard's brief victory had earned them the craft's full attention. Now, the humans were about to face an enemy that was unwilling to underestimate them any longer. Captain Aurelia stood at the command console, watching the readouts with steely determination. "Report," she ordered, her voice calm, though the tension in the room was palpable. "Craft ships are emerging from a cloaked position, Captain," Lieutenant Harris responded. "They've split into 3 groups. The main fleet is advancing on our position, and 2 smaller groups are flanking us from the rear." Aurelia's eyes narrowed. She had expected a response, but this was far more than she had anticipated. The craft were making a coordinated move, attacking from all sides. They were trying to corner the Vanguard, forcing it into a vulnerable position. "We can't outrun them," Aurelia muttered. Helm, evasive maneuvers. We need to buy time while we prepare the counterstrike. Understood, Captain, the helm officer replied. As the Vanguard swerved through space, evading the craft's initial barrage of blasts, the crew worked quickly to activate their weapons and shields. The ship's cannons powered up, ready to fire at a moment's notice. The craft were relentless, but they had underestimated humanity's will to fight. Aurelia's mind raced. Sentinel had offered a plan, but now it was up to the crew to implement it in the heat of the moment. The AI's suggestion was bold, but they didn't have any other options. Commander Laney, what's the status on the ship's core systems? Aurelia asked, her tone sharp. Core systems are stable, Captain, Laney responded. We've completed the diagnostics and all systems are green. We can move forward with the strategy. Good. Prepare to launch all available fighters, Aurelia ordered. We need to distract them long enough to get into position. The tension on the bridge heightened as the ship's fighter bays opened, and the human starfighters shot into space. They were small, fast, and agile, designed to outmaneuver the larger Krath warships. Their mission was clear: keep the Krath fleet occupied while the Vanguard set up its trap. As the fighters engaged in a deadly dogfight with the Krath bombers, Aurelia turned to Sentinel for the next step. The AI's calculations had been precise in the past, and now they were counting on it to guide them through this storm. Initiating plan now, Captain. Sentinel's voice echoed through the ship's systems, redirecting energy to weapons and shields. The Krath will be unaware of our move until it's too late. Aurelia's heart pounded in her chest. This was it, the moment of truth. The Vanguard was moving into position, and the Krath had no idea what was coming. As the fighters harried the alien ships, Aurelia signaled the crew to prepare for the next phase. Prepare for the strike, she ordered. We'll make our move on the Krath flagship first. The Vanguard's cannons flared to life as it began charging toward the enemy's flagship, cutting through the space between them with terrifying speed. The Krath were momentarily distracted by the fighters, but as soon as they saw the Vanguard heading straight for their flagship, they realized their mistake. Enemy flagship is responding. Ensign Vega called out. They're deploying reinforcements to intercept us. But it was too late. The Vanguard had already positioned itself behind the Krath flagship, a move that caught the aliens off guard. Sentinel had calculated the best possible angle of attack, and now the crew was following the plan to the letter. Target their engine core, Aurelia commanded. Fire when ready. The ship's cannons unleashed a devastating barrage of energy blasts, and they struck the Krath flagship's engine core with pinpoint accuracy. The explosion was massive, and the alien ship shuddered violently, its engines rupturing under the force. The once imposing flagship now hung limply in space, dead in the water. We've crippled their command ship, Lieutenant Harris shouted, relief evident in his voice. But the battle was far from over. The Krath, enraged by the loss of their flagship, launched everything they had left at the Vanguard. Their remaining ships surrounded the human battleship, cutting off all avenues of escape. We're surrounded, Ensign Vega said, panic creeping into her voice. Aurelia's mind raced. The Vanguard had dealt a heavy blow to the Krath, but now they were facing their most desperate moment. The Krath would not give up easily. They would fight to the last ship, and humanity's last hope was standing at the center of it all. Helm, get us out of here, Aurelia barked, though she knew they couldn't outrun the Krath. We need to break through their lines and make a tactical retreat. We can't keep fighting at this intensity for much longer. But just as the Vanguard attempted to break through the Krath forces, a new wave of reinforcements appeared, an even larger fleet, more powerful and more aggressive than before. They were closing in fast. Captain, we can't win this fight if we stay here, Lieutenant Harris said urgently. We need to retreat or we'll be overrun. Aurelia knew he was right. The Vanguard was not invincible. They had to live to fight another day. She made the decision in an instant. Engage full-speed retreat, she ordered. We've caused enough damage. Let's live to fight again. The Vanguard turned away from the craft forces, its engines firing with all the power they had left. The craft ships chased them for a brief moment, but the Vanguard's superior speed and maneuverability allowed it to slip away into the darkness of space. The immediate danger had passed, but as the Vanguard limped back toward the Galactic Council's flagship, Aurelia knew that the craft would not stop. They would pursue. They would adapt. And humanity's fight for survival was only just beginning. The turning point. The U.S. Vanguard was limping through space, its hull scared and battered from the fierce confrontation with the craft. The crew had barely managed to escape the jaws of defeat, and now they were retreating toward the Galactic Council's flagship, their one remaining ally in a galaxy on the brink of destruction. The feeling of uncertainty hung heavy in the air. Had they truly done enough? Could they survive the coming storm? Captain Aurelia stood on the bridge, staring out at the vastness of space. Despite their victory over the craft flagship, the battle was far from over. The craft were regrouping, their forces growing stronger with every passing day. And yet, humanity had managed to strike back. For the first time in years, the galaxy had seen hope. "Captain," Ensign Vega called, her voice breaking through Aurelia's thoughts. "The craft are tracking us. They're on our tail, closing in fast." Aurelia's gaze hardened. "How long until they catch up with us?" "We'll have about 30 minutes, Vega replied, "before they can jump into our sector. We need to act fast." Aurelia clenched her fists. They couldn't afford another head-to-head confrontation like the last one. If they didn't strike first, the craft would swarm them. The Vanguard was outnumbered and outgunned, but it had one advantage: speed. The crew had managed to stay one step ahead of the craft before, and they could do it again. "Helm, can we push the engines further?" Aurelia asked, her eyes fixed on the console. "We need more time." "We can push it to full capacity, Captain," the helm officer replied, "but we'll be burning through reserves at an alarming rate. The ship might not be able to keep up for long." "Do it," Aurelia ordered. "We'll need every second." The ship's engines roared to life, pushing the Vanguard forward at maximum speed. The crew felt the force as the ship accelerated, sending them hurtling through space. It was a risky maneuver, but it bought them time to plan their next move. "Commander Laney," Aurelia called out, her mind already working through the possibilities. "I need a strategy. What can we do with the remaining resources we have?" Laney stood at the tactical console, quickly running simulations on the ship's systems. "We have enough energy to charge the main guns one last time," Laney said. "But after that, we'll have to rely on the smaller weapons and evasive maneuvers. We can't take another full-on engagement." Aurelia nodded. The Vanguard's main guns had been the key to their previous victory, but they couldn't afford to waste another shot. They would need to be strategic. Every move, every decision, could be the difference between life and death. "We're going to do something they won't expect," Aurelia said, her voice full of determination. "We'll hit them hard and fast, with everything we have left." The crew worked quickly, prepping the ship for a final, devastating assault. The Vanguard had always been a force of nature, but now it was a wounded animal, fighting to survive. Still, humanity's will to fight was stronger than ever. "All fighters, prepare for a coordinated attack," Aurelia said, turning to the communications officer. "We're going to draw the craft fleet into a trap. We'll use the fighters to distract them, while we launch everything at their lead ships." The plan was risky, but it was their only chance. The Vanguard would lure the craft into a small asteroid field just outside the Council's flagship, hoping the terrain would give them the cover they needed to launch a surprise attack. As the fighters launched into space, weaving and darting between the enemy ships, Aurelia's heart pounded. The craft fleet had been lured into the asteroid field, and now they were vulnerable. They had to act before the craft realized the trap. Firing all remaining main guns, Laney shouted, her voice filled with urgency. The Vanguard's massive cannons powered up, and with one final colossal strike, they fired into the heart of the Krath fleet. The energy from the blast rocked the field, disintegrating the nearest craft ships and causing a chain reaction throughout the fleet. Explosions erupted as the Krath warships were caught in the blast, sending debris scattering through space. The Krath were caught completely off guard. Their formations broke apart, and they scrambled to regroup. "We've hit their flagship," Lieutenant Harris shouted, eyes wide in disbelief. They're reeling. Aurelia's heart skipped a beat. It had worked. The Vanguard's final gambit had paid off. The Krath flagship, now heavily damaged, was crippled, and the rest of the fleet was disoriented, unable to organize an effective counterattack. But Aurelia knew this wouldn't last. They had only moments before the Krath rallied and retaliated. "Now we run," Aurelia commanded. "We've done enough damage for today. Full speed retreat." The Vanguard turned sharply, its engines firing at full capacity. The remaining craft ships were struggling to regain control, but the Vanguard was already slipping into the darkness of space, leaving the craft forces behind in disarray. As the Vanguard fled, Aurelia allowed herself a moment of relief. They had done the impossible. The Krath fleet had been broken, and humanity had proven that it could stand against the might of the invaders. But the war was far from over. The Krath would not forget this defeat, and as Aurelia watched the stars ahead, she knew the hardest battles were still to come. Victory or defeat. The U.S. Vanguard had barely managed to escape the clutches of the Krath fleet, its engines firing at full power to distance itself from the chaos it had just unleashed. Captain Aurelia stood at the command console, staring out into the vast emptiness of space. The ship was battered, its systems strained to their limits, but it was still intact. Humanity's final hope was still alive. "We've made it," Lieutenant Harris breathed, looking up from the console. "The Krath fleet is retreating. We did it." Aurelia's gaze hardened as she surveyed the damage on the bridge. The crew was exhausted, but their faces reflected something rare in this galaxy, a spark of hope. They had struck a decisive blow against the Krath, and for the first time, the humans felt like they had the upper hand. But Aurelia knew it was far from over. "We haven't won yet," she replied, her voice calm but unwavering. "We've broken their fleet for now, but we haven't defeated the Krath Empire. We need to stay vigilant." Her words hung heavy in the air, but they were true. The Vanguard's victory had been hard-won, and the galaxy's battle for survival was far from over. The Krath might have been forced into retreat, but they would regroup, reorganize, and come back with a vengeance. It was only a matter of time. "Captain," Ensign Vega spoke up, her voice filled with urgency. "We're getting a message from the Galactic Council. They're requesting an immediate debriefing. They've already started rebuilding the defense fleet and need our intel on what just happened." Aurelia nodded. "We'll be there shortly. Let them know we'll be ready to brief them in 30 minutes. As the Vanguard limped toward the Council's flagship, the crew began to work tirelessly to make the ship operational again. Repairs were underway, and though it would take time to restore the Vanguard to full strength, there was no rest for the weary. The galaxy still needed them. Hours later, the U.S. Vanguard arrived at the Galactic Council's flagship, a massive space station orbiting a dying star at the center of the galaxy. The Council had been forced into hiding in the outer rim after the Krath's relentless march, but their resolve had never wavered. Now, with humanity's unexpected victory, they were ready to take action once more. Captain Aurelia and her crew entered the briefing room, where representatives from the Council were waiting. The room was tense, but there was a sense of cautious optimism in the air. The councilors knew the Krath wouldn't let this defeat slide, but the Vanguard's actions had shifted the balance. For the first time in years, there was hope. Aurelia stood before the Council, her face grim. "The Krath are not done," she began. "We hit them hard, but this is only the beginning. They'll regroup, and they will be back. Our victory has only bought us time." Councilor Ilara, the head of the Galactic Council, nodded solemnly. "We understand, Captain. But that's all we need right now. Time to rebuild, to reorganize, to unite the remaining systems, and prepare for what's next." Aurelia took a deep breath. She had never been one to sugarcoat the truth, but she knew that now, more than ever, unity was the galaxy's only hope. "We'll do everything we can, Counselor. The Vanguard will continue to lead the charge against the Krath. We can't afford to fail." The room fell silent, the weight of the responsibility heavy on all their shoulders. The galaxy had faced unimaginable destruction, but the survivors, humans and allies alike, had proven they could fight back. Together, they could stand against the Krath. But as Aurelia looked around the room, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the calm before the storm. The Krath would not take this defeat lightly. They would come again, and when they did, the Vanguard and its crew would be ready to meet them. "We've won a battle," Aurelia said, her voice firm. "But the war is far from over." The U.S. Vanguard spent the next few days in dock, undergoing repairs as the Galactic Council began rebuilding its forces. The crew was given much-needed rest, though there was little time for celebration. The Krath were still out there, and they would be back in full force before long. Every moment of peace was a gift, but it was a fragile one. As the repairs continued, Aurelia spent much of her time on the bridge, staring out at the stars. The vastness of space had never seemed more daunting, but it had also never seemed more full of possibility. For the first time in a long while, humanity had a real chance to stand against the Krath Empire. And they would not back down. Aurelia knew the road ahead would be filled with more bloodshed, more sacrifices, but also more victories. The Vanguard had proven that humanity could fight back against an enemy that seemed invincible. The galaxy had seen a glimpse of what was possible when they united and refused to give up. With one final glance at the stars, Captain Aurelia turned away from the view. "Prepare the ship," she said, her voice resolute. "We're not finished yet. The Krath will soon learn that humanity is a force they cannot ignore." As the U.S. Vanguard powered up and prepared to depart, Captain Aurelia knew the battle for the galaxy was just beginning. But they had taken the first step toward victory. And they would keep fighting, no matter the cost.